will, go ahead and take your Bibles and be open to Isaiah 46. Isaiah 46, that'll be the text for our lesson tonight. Before we get into our lesson tonight, we have some good news. Randy, Lisa, Kelsey, and Brady Craig have made the decision to place membership with the congregation here. And we're very thankful for that decision. They've met with the elders, and so we welcome them, and we're glad to have them working and worshiping with us. For many of you, they are not strangers. Many of you know them from years back, and we're thankful they are back with us again. And so make sure that you make them feel at home and feel welcome here at South Haven. Isaiah 46 is a wonderful chapter. It is a chapter about a God who will carry you. A God who will carry you. Would you rather have a God that you must carry upon your shoulders, or a God who will carry you upon His? That doesn't seem to be a very hard question to answer in my mind. I want a God who will carry me, rather than a God that I have to carry. But Israel was somehow perplexed about that. And Israel was hedging back and forth between a God that would carry them and a God that they had to carry. And so Isaiah wrote these words to them. They were worshiping gods that they had made. They were worshiping gods that they carried upon their shoulders and that they set into place. They were worshiping gods that they called out to, but who did not answer. They were worshiping gods that they wanted to come and help them, and yet those gods could not move from the place where they had been placed. And yet, in spite of all of that, and during all of that, when they were calling out to these false gods, there was a God who wanted to carry them. There was a God that wanted to come to help them. There was a God who wanted to hear and answer their cries. And yet they couldn't make up their mind which God they wanted. And so in Isaiah chapter 46, we have the words of God through His prophet. And notice the tender way in which God addresses His people, beginning in verse 3. Hearken unto me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, which are born by me from the belly, which are carried from the womb. And even to your old age I am He, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made and I will bear, even I will carry and will deliver you. That's a beautiful passage in verse 4, where God says, even to old age I will carry you. Even when you're old and gray-headed, God says, I will carry you. I will be a God who carries you. Now, for most of us as fathers, there reaches an age with our children when we don't want to carry them anymore. Now, when they're babies, we don't mind carrying them. Someone must carry them. But as they get old enough to walk, and as they get bigger and they become heavier, there gets to be the point to where you say, you've got two good legs, stand on them and walk on them. Not going to carry you anymore. But our Father in heaven never says that. Our Father in heaven says, I'll carry you till you're old and gray-headed. I want to be that kind of a Father to you. I want to be a God who carries you. Now, most of us are familiar with the poem Footprints by Mary Stevenson. And in this poem, as you recall, a man has a dream. And in that dream, he pictures himself walking with God on the beach. There are two sets of footprints. And through each of the scenes of life, he sees these sets of footprints. But he gets to the end of his life and he looks back over his life and he sees that at certain times during his life there was only one set of footprints. He becomes concerned and he asks the Lord, Lord, during those times of my life, the harder times of my life, why is it that there are only one set of footprints? Why did you leave me when I needed you the most? And God said, my child, I didn't leave you. It was at those times that I doesn't leave us. He'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. But it is during those times where He takes us up in His arms and He bears us. He carries us. It doesn't really matter how old we are. He still will bear us up and carry us, comfort and help us during those times. God uses three different pictures in the Old Testament of how He carries His children. And I don't know which of these pictures will mean the most to you. There's one that means more to me than the others. I don't know how it will be with you. But I do believe that at least these pictures should resonate with you. And they should cause you to understand what a loving Father we have. A Father who will carry us. First of all, God carried Israel as an eagle her young. In Exodus chapter 19 and verse 4, God says, I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. God carried them on eagle's wings. Likely this means that God carried them with strength. And God carried them with speed away from Egypt. You think about the instructions that God gave them as they were preparing to leave Egypt. That word haste is used a number of times. Because they're going to be in a hurry as they leave Egypt. Because they're leaving on eagle's wings. God's going to carry them out of this land. And He's going to carry them out with great strength. And He's going to carry them out with great speed. What a beautiful picture this is. It's the picture of a mother eagle as she's teaching her young eaglets to fly. And as they're testing their wings, she's flying beneath them to make sure that they do not fall. She's there to bear them up if they ever need her. And so it is with us that underneath are the everlasting arms. God is bearing us on His wings. He's there. He lets us use what little strength we have. But He's always there to catch us. He's always ready and willing to carry us when we're weary and when we're tired and when we can't go on anymore. In Deuteronomy 32 and verse 11, we again have this picture of the eagle stirring up her nest. And it says that she beareth them on her wings. And that's a picture of how God cared for His children. In Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 31, Isaiah says, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings of eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Here are those who can mount up with wings as eagles. Why? It isn't so much their wings, it's His wings. But on His wings, they're able to reach new heights. With His wings, they're able to go on. When they get weary, He's there to sustain them and to help them. So what a beautiful picture this is of God. God as this mother eagle, as this eagle will bear her young. But in the second place, God carried Israel as a shepherd His lamb. Throughout the Scriptures, God is pictured as a shepherd, but one of the most beautiful pictures is in Isaiah 40 and verse 11, where God is pictured as carrying them. He shall feed His flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs with His arm and carry them in His bosom, and shall gently lead those that are with young. He gathers them with His arm. He carries them in His bosom. The shepherd carrying the lamb. Genesis 33 and verse 13, that context, pictures an occasion from the life of Jacob. Jacob was a shepherd. And Jacob, as a shepherd, moved from place to place. But one of the difficulties with being a shepherd is, if you had a lot of sheep, they would very quickly go through the grass that was available. And so you were always having to move. And for the older sheep, that wasn't that big of a problem. But for the young sheep to constantly have to move and to try to keep up with the older sheep, that was something they weren't ready to do. It was something that wore them out. It was something that literally would kill them if the shepherd didn't give them special care and special attention. And if he didn't pay attention and he didn't bear up the ones that were weak and the ones who were tired and the ones that couldn't go on anymore. And so the picture of Jacob is that Jacob will bear them up. He will gently lead his flock. What a picture that is for elders, for shepherds in the Lord's church today. Well, shepherds have to be aware of what the sheep can do. They have to be aware of the strength of the sheep. They have to watch for signs that the sheep are weary. Are we asking too much of the sheep? Are we trying to get them to do too much? Are we having too much of this? Are we trying to do this too often? What are we doing? Is it taxing on them? Is it wearing them out? That's a consideration. I know of a congregation that every time they turned around had a fellowship meal. And I'm all for fellowship meals. Maybe a year or two, I like fellowship meals. But this congregation had a fellowship meal, it seemed like every week. And it got to the point to where fewer and fewer people were showing up for the fellowship meal, and less food was being brought each time. It was simply that individuals that had been overdone. Is fellowship a good thing? Absolutely. Is eating together a good thing? Sure it is. But you've got to be careful and make sure you don't overdo it. You've got to make sure that it doesn't become a burden rather than a blessing. In that congregation, it had become a burden. I don't think that's true here. We may not have enough. That's my opinion. We may not have enough here. So I don't think we overdo that, but I know congregations that do. That's just an example of concern that we may have to have over various things. Maybe there are other things that we're asking of members. Maybe there are some considerations that we could take to realize that the pace of life today is extremely hard. People are extremely busy today. It's not a matter of them putting worldly things before spiritual things. We never would encourage them or condone that. That's a consideration in the world in which we live. It's a consideration where people drive long distances to work and it takes a lot of time to get there and to get back home. It's a consideration when work today isn't 5 days, but sometimes 6 days or 7 days. That's a consideration. And if we're wise, and we certainly will be a shepherd that takes those things into consideration and that doesn't overtax the sheep. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus told the parable of the man that had 100 sheep, and one of them went astray, and he went after the one that went astray. And when he found it, the text says he placed it upon his shoulders, rejoicing. There's the picture of the shepherd who is carrying his lamb, on this occasion carrying it upon his shoulders. This lamb has wandered away, and no doubt this lamb has worn itself out trying to find its way back, but couldn't find its way back. It wandered about concerned and afraid and hungry and tired. Here's the shepherd that will carry it back and will nurture it back to health again. Psalm 23, of course, is a text that we know well. The shepherd's song. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What a beautiful picture it paints of the Lord as our shepherd, as He carries us, as He restores our soul, as He meets our needs. Beautiful picture of a God who will carry you. But my favorite picture is found in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 31. In Deuteronomy 1 and verse 31, God says, "And in the wilderness where thou hast seen how that the Lord thy God bare thee, as a man doth bear his son, and all the way that ye went until ye came into this place." God carried Israel as a father his son. Have you ever seen a father carry his son, a young son, on his shoulders? Maybe they're at the zoo, or maybe they're doing something else, and this little toddler has just worn himself out. He's all energy. He's into this. He's into that. He's as active as he can be, but his batteries are running low. And he's beginning to drag. And the father, in pity and in compassion, picks up his son and says, "Son, sit here." And he bears the son on his shoulders. Won't be long before that son will be on the ground, running around, got his energy back, ready to get into something again. But for that moment, the father picks up his son, picks up his daughter, and carries them on his shoulders. That's a picture that God uses to picture how He carried Israel. I'm 41 years old, and so I have a hard time remembering that. I have a hard time remembering being on my dad's shoulders. But I can imagine still how that feels. And I can still imagine how wonderful it is to have someone who carries you when you're too tired to take another step. To have someone who will allow you to get a new perspective on things. You know, it's hard being this tall, in the middle of adults, with them blocking your view of everything. And suddenly to be taken from down here and to be placed up here and to suddenly have a vantage point above the crowd. Oh, how wonderful that is. And there are times in life where God says, you're down here and you're crowded out in all the views. You're missing out on what's really good and wonderful and great. And so God says, I'll put you on my shoulders. And I'll let you see what it looks like from my perspective. What it looks like from here. Oh, what a wonderful Father we have, who will bear His Son upon His shoulders. Consider some other passages that talk about this. Isaiah 63 and verse 9 says of God, in His love and in His pity He redeemed them, and He bare them and carried them all the days of old. God carried them all those years when they were on their way to the promised land. Psalm 103 and verse 13 says, like as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear Him. How often does God look down and in pity on us lift us up and carry us and bear us because we can't go on without Him and without His sustaining power. In Proverbs 3 and verse 12, for whom the Lord loveth He correcteth, even as a father, the Son in whom He delighteth. God delights in His children. He corrects them because they need it, but He carries them also because they need it. 1 Thessalonians 2 and verse 11 says, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as a father doth his children. Yes, God commands us. He charges us from time to time. But He also is a God who carries us when we need Him to. I don't know about you, but I want a God who carries me and not a God that I have to carry. I don't want a God that I have to place upon my shoulders and take Him where I want Him to go. I don't want a God that I have to put in place and then when I'm ready for Him I have to come and retrieve Him again. No, I want a God who carries me. A God who bears me up as the eagle upon His wings. A God who carries me as a shepherd His sheep and as a father His son. But I want to end in Luke chapter 16 and verse 22. You remember that Jesus told this story of a rich man and of a poor man. Rich man, we don't know his name. We know he fared sumptuously every day. We know that he was clothed in purple and fine linen. But we know the name of the poor man. His name was Lazarus. And we know that he begged for the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. We know that the dogs came and licked his sores. And we know that both of these men died. And both of them made their way to eternity. But Luke 16 and verse 22 says of Lazarus that he was carried of angels to Abraham's bosom. I don't know about you, but I look forward to that. Oh, I don't want to go tonight. I've got work here left to do. There are things that I hope God still will allow me the time to be able to do. But when that day comes, to take that flight, to be born of angels, to my eternal home, I don't think that's a bad way to go. A God who carries me through life as an eagle, as a shepherd, as a father, will carry me when I die to my eternal home, to my eternal abode. Can you think of the loved ones that you've had who were faithful to the Lord, who the moment they closed their eyes, the moment the spirit departed from the body, the angels carried them home. Can you imagine the joy? Can you imagine the bliss, the wonder that must have accompanied that journey? But that's what we have when we serve a God who carries us. Tonight, I want you to consider what Israel was considering in Isaiah 46. Am I going to serve a God that I have to carry upon my shoulders, or am I going to serve a God that carries me upon His? You say, well, we don't worship idols like they did. Well, Colossians 3 and verse 5 says we do. Covetousness, which is idolatry. There's many idols today as there were in those days. Am I going to serve that which I must carry, or am I going to serve the one who will carry me? It's really not a difficult choice if we think about it properly. I hope that you will think about it properly tonight. I hope you will make the choice tonight to give your life to God, to believe that Jesus Christ is His Son. John 3, verse 16. To repent and turn away from every sin in your life. Luke 13, 3 and 5. To make the good confession of Acts 8, verse 37. To be immersed in water, to have every sin washed away, and then to be faithful to the day of your death. To allow God to carry you through life. To have a God that will answer when you call. To have a God that will come when you need Him. To have a God that will carry you when you can't go another step further. And to have a God that ultimately will carry you home to be with Him when this life is over. Tonight, if you need to respond, we invite you to as we stand and as we sing.